Hi, I'm Mrs. Q, and today we're going to talk more about the Battle for New York in 1776 and specifically about the naval battle. Now, I know some of you are out there laughing and snickering. Oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. We didn't have a navy. There weren't any naval battles in 1776, and that may be true. We didn't have a navy, and there were no official naval battles. But what we did have was American ingenuity, a will to win at whatever the cost, and some of the bravest and best ship captains in the world. And so instead of fighting the British directly on the water, we harassed them in numerous ways to simply annoy them and put them off their game. Now, you can find this video along with my whole series on the Battle for New York in my YouTube playlist called The Battle for New York. So please check out those other videos as I'm following the battle from the massing of the armies in the spring of 1776 through the end of the Battle for New York in November 1776. So let's get on with it, the naval battle. The August 26, 1776 issue of John Holt's Journal or General Advertiser gives us an idea of how much of the Royal Navy was here in New York that summer. He tells us there were two 64-gun ships, two 44-gun ships, 20 frigates, and 300 associated frigates and transport ships, so giving us over 300 ships in New York Harbor. Now, those ships, which had been massing in the lower harbor in July, moved up through the Narrows into the upper harbor, where they then took their position in front of General Washington's headquarters at number 1 Broadway. A man in Brooklyn remarked there were so many ships in the harbor that he could walk from Brooklyn to New Jersey across the decks of those ships and not touch water. Another man said that when you looked out onto the harbor at night, when the ships were all lit up, it looked like all of London was afloat there. The fleet, under command of Admiral Richard Howe, was here to support the ground efforts of his brother, General William Howe. The idea was to lure Washington's army onto Manhattan Island, surround it, defeat it, then use the island as a base of operation to further subdue the American colonies. We can see how vital the role of the Royal Navy was that summer. Ships were in the Long Island Sound. Ships, of course, were in the harbor. There were still ships in the lower harbor, ships in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Hudson River, and in other waterways surrounding New York. I mean, let's be honest. What could Washington's army do against this Navy, one of the greatest naval powers in the world? Not much. But to give us an idea of what they might do, let's look back a few years to the year 1772, Rhode Island, and something called the Gaspé Affair. Smuggling was a regular way of life in the American colonies, right? The English taxed everything that traveled on their ships to the American colonies and from the American colonies. You paid customs or tariffs when those goods went in and out of the ports. In order to avoid some of that taxation, a lot of times ship captains would unload a portion of their cargo along the coastline somewhere and then bring the rest into the harbor and through customs and just pay on what was on the ship. And this was a regular way of life. Plus, all kinds of contraband was smuggled into the country through those little lagoons and little waterways up and down the East Coast. And everyone knew it went on regularly. This was business as usual, and everyone on both sides knew it. But England still tried to stop as much of this illegal trade as possible and would send naval ships to capture these contraband ships, or they might call them privateers or pirates. They would take the stuff aboard, the contraband, and they also might take possession of the ship itself. In 1772, the HMS Gaspé, under command of a Lieutenant Duddingston, was dispatched to Narragansett Bay, Rhode Island, to try to cut down on some of this smuggling. It's an understatement to say how much they hated the Gaspé, and this lieutenant decided to make their anger known. The Gaspé had become more and more aggressive in its pursuit of these Rhode Island ships. So one day, when the Gaspé was tracking a local packet ship called the Hannah went into shallow enough waters for the Gaspé to run aground. Now, later, recollections of the incident say that the captain of the Hannah, a very good captain, did this on purpose, knowing the Gaspé would get stuck in this spot. Well, Lieutenant Duddingston, finding that they couldn't dislodge the boat, decided they would wait till the next day to high tide and then let the tide move them out of their stuck position. Unfortunately, he wasn't going to be there that long. The men of Rhode Island that night boarded the Gaspé. Duddingston was shot and injured. He wasn't killed, but he was wounded, and all of the crew were removed from the ship. The men of Rhode Island then burned the Gaspé. When news of this hit the Parliament, it was a shockwave. Now, these kinds of incidents had sort of happened before, but nothing as blatant as this, that an actual military warship on duty had been destroyed by American colonists. It was shocking to the British Parliament, and it began to give them an idea of how far the Americans were willing to go to disagree and fight against their policies of taxation. Now, back to New York, 1776. Washington's men are looking for ways to foil the British Navy. They can't stop it, but they can do things to harass it. And one of those men is a 25-year-old soldier from Massachusetts named Silas Talbot. Talbot was a captain in the 2nd Continental Rhode Island Regiment and had fought in the siege of Boston. Along with the Continental Army, he'd made his way to New York early in 1776. In September, Talbot was in command of a fire ship. Now, a fire ship was a ship that was loaded with combustible or flammable materials, set on fire, and either steered or kind of pushed so it would float out among British ships or enemy ships. The hopes was that it might catch one of those ships on fire, or at least cause a disarray in the formation of the fleet. A special type of fire ship called a hell burner was meant to actually explode next to an enemy ship. Talbot's intended target was the HMS Asia, a ship that New Yorkers were familiar with. It had been here for a couple years by now, a familiar sight to everyone in the city. And the attempt failed. Talbot was really badly burned in the attempt, but he was given a promotion to major. In 1779, Talbot was commissioned a captain in the new Continental Navy and given command of a privateer, the General Washington. He was later captured by the British and held as a prisoner of war until 1781. Later in 1798, Talbot was recommissioned in now the American Navy and was given command of the USS Constitution, you might know as Old Ironsides. Today, the USS Constitution is the oldest warship still floating, I think, in the world, and it's in the port in Boston. Silas Talbot himself is buried here in New York City in Trinity Graveyard. So one way we went after the British that summer, the use of these fire ships, or hell burners, as they were also called. But that wasn't all we did. Now, since we're talking about the Navy, I'm sure some of you know that the person I really, really want to talk about is the great black pirate himself, Captain John Paul Jones. Unfortunately, Captain Jones was not in New York in 1776, so I can't really talk about him here. You all know he's one of my favorite characters in the war, one of my favorite commanders, and one of my favorite people in general. Some of you may have seen my episode of Mysteries at the Museum that I did about John Paul Jones and the Battle of Flamborough Head in 1779. I will be making a separate video here all about John Paul Jones and that battle and the aftermath of that battle. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that video. But here we go, back to New York in 1776. Probably the most well-known antic deployed against the British in New York in the battle in 1776 was the famous Bushnell Turtle, the first ever recorded use of a submarine. The Turtle was made by David Bushnell of Connecticut. It looked like a big wooden egg and could carry one pilot inside. It had portals around the top and kind of like a snorkel, so you could raise up and get some extra air, but it could carry about 20 minutes of air inside itself. It had a filament that lit the interior for the pilot and a number of different navigational devices to help him find his way. A propeller moved it through the water, and the propeller was driven by pedals like a bicycle, and mounted on the side of the Turtle was like a keg or a barrel filled with gunpowder meant to be deployed as a bomb. The way the Turtle was meant to work is that the pilot would pedal out next to a enemy warship and turn a crank to attach that barrel onto the side of the ship. The barrel then would have a fuse that would start lighting and give the pilot time to detach from the barrel and go away in the opposite direction before the whole thing exploded. So that summer, David Bushnell trained American Sergeant Ezra Lee for a mission in the Turtle. At 11 o'clock at night on September 7th, Sergeant Lee set off on his mission. and it was to try to blow a hole in the side of the British flagship, Admiral Howe's own ship, the HMS Eagle. Sergeant Lee said he paddled around in the harbor for quite a while, finding it difficult to find the Eagle. He was disoriented, it was dark, there were a lot of ships in the harbor. It took him quite a long time to find the Eagle. When he finally got up alongside the Eagle, he wasn't able to attach the barrel. He tried many different times and wasn't able to do it. He then surfaced and saw that it was dawn. He was afraid that he was going to be captured. So he released the barrel and started paddling off in the opposite direction. The HMS Eagle was anchored not far from Governor's Island, which was a British base that summer. The British, seeing this weird object bobbing around in the harbor, decided to go off in a boat, paddle over and see what it was. But not recognizing it, they said, and fearing a cruel Yankee trick, they went back to Governor's Island. In the meantime, that bomb, or torpedo, as Sergeant Lee called it, was still floating around in the harbor, and it made its way to where the East River meets New York Harbor, and it exploded, sending a huge column of water and wood shards high into the air. Over in Brooklyn, General Israel Putnam and his men cheered wildly at what they thought was a success against a British naval ship. And although it wasn't a success, it worried the British quite a bit. Unfortunately, the Turtle sunk the following month in October when it was being transported on another American ship that was sunk by British warships. But David Bushnell continued working on his idea of underwater mines or bombs or torpedoes. And you might know they were used to harass the fleet at Philadelphia during the battle there. Now, writer Francis Hopkinson wrote a poem you might know called The Battle of the Kegs, all about this incident. There is a wonderful verse in this poem about British General William Howe and his girlfriend Betsy Loring, and I'm going to save that for another time, as it is one of my favorite things to recite on my tour about General Howe. But back to some serious stuff, the Battle of New York. Well, we might not have stopped the Royal Fleet in 1776, but we get a look at some of the ingenuity and determination and unconventional methods that we would continue to deploy against the British throughout the Revolutionary War. It was, of course, impossible for us to beat the British using British methods of warfare, so we're continually looking at different ways we could defeat them. And I'll be talking about one of those methods in my upcoming video on the Battle of Pell's Point, coming out in October, where you will again see our friends, Glover's regiments, or the Marblehead Mariners. Don't miss it. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked my video, please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any of these. And of course, as always, if you're coming to New York or you're in New York, please take a tour with me. I love meeting everyone from social media. I'm Karen Q, or Mrs. Q, PatriotToursNYC.com. Until next time.